Stabilization team.
Great, thank you so much, and good afternoon, everyone. As Catherine has mentioned, my name is Seneca Holmes. I'm the Director of Neighborhood Equity and Stabilization. It is a small division within the Agency of Denver Economic Development and Opportunity, which is the city's economic development arm. And of course, I'm here to introduce our partners, Center for Community Wealth Building, who will be leading most of this presentation. For context, however, I thought that it was important to give some ideas to what the perspective of the city was, and why we originally engaged CCWB. So our mission at DEDO is to promote business preservation, growth, and entrepreneurship. In my office, in particular, NEST, is concerned with small minority business development and sustainability in low mod income neighborhoods. It should come as no surprise that Denver neighborhoods have and are rapidly changing, I would say in many positive ways, but also in some very unfortunate ways. So as housing prices have increased, several of our neighborhoods have experienced involuntary displacement. This is happening specifically in a lot of our BIPOC communities. And as residents and businesses are leaving, the historical and cultural fabric of our neighborhoods is being diminished to some degree. And my office was actually created to explicitly to help mitigate that. So as an extension of DEDO, we have a focus on economic development and specifically business development. And we've been exploring how new businesses can preserve some of our neighborhood heritage. Additionally, we are seeing a natural expiration of businesses through retirement or mortality. And these are businesses that in some instances are central to a neighborhood's identity. There is no one solution to addressing these issues. We are in the process currently of creating a business toolbox of sorts to address these issues. But that said, we see tremendous promise in promoting and supporting a cooperative business model. We see co-ops as a tool that allows low mod income entrepreneurs to pool resources to become business owners and experience real wealth creation. And I would say at the end of the day, that is the primary focus of DEDO and NEST, is to promote wealth creation in our more underserved neighborhoods. And that's why we engaged our region's subject matter experts, Center for Community Wealth Building. They've been great partners in helping us understand how we as a city can help foster the co-op model. So, I've laid out some of the priorities that Denver is attempting to address. However, I would say the co-op model can really apply to any city that is looking to provide a full array of economic development opportunities and tools for their residents. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jessica.
Thank you, Seneca. Hello, everyone. I'm Jessica Holguin. I'm the Executive Director of Center for Community Wealth Building. And it's an honor to be here with you all. For those of you who may not necessarily, who didn't attend the last sessions, I want to make sure that everyone has a little bit of background. So Center for Community Wealth Building was truly built to look at how we do economic development in a different way. And so our vision is a people-owned, inclusive, and sustainable Metro Denver economy that catalyzes prosperous and resilient communities free from racism and injustice. The first session that we had in collaboration with Metro Mayor's Caucus focused on how we use the economic model and how we ensure that we have the anchor institutions that are actually building wealth, that are using their economic engine to build wealth. So we had Dr. Nancy Cantor from Rutgers University present on the model that they use. And we also had a representative from Cleveland to talk about the Evergreen Cooperatives and how that was built. And so we had really good conversation about the possibility of what can happen. The second session included a conversation with Angela Glover Blackwell with Policy Link. And she talked about the importance of building an inclusive economy. The third session included a conversation with mayors and anchor institutions as to the actions that had been taken since the second session. And at that session, participants, at that time, Seneca talked about the work that the city of Denver was doing to identify more opportunities around worker cooperatives and cooperatives in general. And participants were really excited about that. And so they extended the invitation one more time to learn more about what the city had done and what they had learned. And so this session includes a lot of the lessons learned throughout this deeper engagement and deeper research that we've done to make sure that we're creating an ecosystem that maximizes our strengths, our abilities in our communities, and that it also takes the concerns and priorities of municipalities to ensure that we're building a stronger ecosystem. And so in this session, you will hear from my colleague, Paul Bindo, who's the Cooperative Development Director, on the findings of this report. And then at the end, we have a link for you all to access the report if you choose to read the 67 pages, I believe it is. So thank you all for the invitation, and I'll now hand it over to Paul Bindo to get into the detail.
Thank you, Jessica, and I'm so glad to be here with you all today. So one of the things that I wanted to just start us out with was giving us some examples and some ideas and case studies.
Whoa.
All right, was that just Paul? Paul's briefing? Okay. All right, well, while he
so that we can have in our mind, like, what does it actually mean when we talk about an inclusive economy?
Wow.
Note that it worked the 15 minutes before everyone joined the call.
Right.
All right, while we get him back, I can talk a little bit about the Cooperativa Mano a Mano. We wanted to highlight some examples for you all of what it takes. Oh, there's Paul. You're back.
I'm so sorry, my internet just collapsed and then came back. Like, I was trying to join with my phone, so apologies. But yeah, I'm not sure what Jessica was able to say. The main thing I wanted to communicate about Mano a Mano that is innovative is this group of workers were originally employed part-time by a nonprofit. And so the nonprofit has supported them in forming their own cooperative LLC that gives them greater autonomy and greater control of the kinds of contracts they take on and the amount of work that they're able to accept, because it's going to be a separate entity. And so we're really excited because there are 15 workers. Most of them, as you can see, are women, and they will each have an ownership stake in this business. And so when the business does well, they will also reap that benefit. Can we go to the second slide? The second case study. So this second case study is a co-op that is now, I think, 6 years old. Their name is Mujeres Emprendedoras, and they are based in Westwood. And their initial vision was, how can we create an economic engine for our community and for the women in our community specifically that allows us to not experience displacement, to not be displaced from Westwood, and to allow us to build the wealth that we need to acquire homes. And so what's unique about this co-op compared to almost any other co-op I've seen is that they use their net profit and they allocate that to their individual members' accounts inside the business in order to save for down payments for a home. And so they are really trying to leverage that together. They probably will use, their collective funds to purchase the first home, and use everyone's funds, to purchase the first home and then receive that back to buy a second home. And so this kind of, pooling of capital is really common in cooperatives, but they're very unique in that they're not just using it for, personal wealth creation, but they're trying to actually leverage something for collective wealth creation. And they also, the services they provide are primarily catering, but they also sell salsas and they have a jewelry line as well. Go to the next case study. The third case study is I Am Me Mentors Cooperative. They're a new cooperative and it's composed of 3 members, and they provide tutoring services as well as swim lessons. What I love about this co-op is they're really focused on providing adaptive tutoring services to their clients, which range from low-income students all the way to students that live in Silicon Valley. And they also provide adaptive pricing because they have such a range of clients. But they've translated all of that responsiveness and making sure that they are meeting students where they're at to their workplace. So these three individuals each had experiences in a traditional educational environment, in traditional school, and they found that it was very challenging working conditions, and they felt that it was not accommodating to their needs as employees, and so they're able to create the workplace that better meets their needs. So I think just this is a small example of people using the cooperative model to empower themselves and to create a better working condition for themselves. We go to the next slide. Yes, I believe this is you.
Thank you. So before we get any further, I want to make sure that everyone is on the same page when it comes to the definition of worker cooperatives. So a worker cooperative is a values-driven business, as you saw in these three examples, that puts worker and community benefit at the core of the purpose. The two central characteristics of worker cooperatives are, in essence, workers own the business and they participate in their financial success, and they, in essence, maximize their labor. And workers have representation, which in essence is one member, one vote. They're part of a board of directors, and they adhere to democratic principles. And so they're responsible for surplus and budgeting. They are the ones who are developing the business strategy and operations. They have control over the managerial structures, and they also control working conditions and wages, which, as you can see, continues to perpetuate healthier and more beneficial workspaces. Next slide, please. And so we wanted to share with you all that this is something that, while it's fairly new here in the area, it's happening throughout the nation and actually throughout the world. There's definitely a movement of looking at more democratic workplaces. There's an estimated, even though there's an identified 612 worker-owned cooperatives in the U.S., there's actually closer to 1,000. And as the Democracy at Work Institute continues to develop better ways to track those, we're going to start to see that number in Colorado grow more and more. You'll see that a lot of the cooperative presence right now, it's around metropolitan areas. And so our area is poised for success, especially now that we have the support from City of Denver, from the state. There's a lot of opportunity for growth. But you'll see that around us, there's some pretty significant gaps. And so we truly believe that our region can be a leader, a national leader in this movement. So there is a lot of economic benefits. And so if we go to the next slide, when we're talking about the benefits of the cooperatives, as we talked about, most of them are women and BIPOC led. And so the 52% of the worker owners are women. And we have a very diverse background in terms of ownership, which is not necessarily, we're working towards building a more diverse workforce. The parity with firms, the pay gap is significantly lower. There's a 2-to-1 pay gap ratio as opposed to 300-to-1. And actually the most recent presentation that I saw was significantly higher since the pandemic. And so when you think about pay equity and think about the profits or the excess of the business not leaving our communities, that can have a significant impact. And so as a result of that, cooperatives are more resilient during recessions. Just in this past, the pandemic, we saw that workers would much rather cut costs and redistribute hours instead of laying people off. And so that was able to maintain the workers to make sure that nobody was left behind. And so all in all, cooperatives are perfect for inclusive growth because it emphasizes that agency and self-determination. And as Paul shared with Mujeres Emprendedoras, there is a lot of opportunity to actually make sure that we have those who are most impacted benefit from their labor. And so the capital, as he shared with Mujeres, recirculate in the community, within the cooperative, and to ultimately make sure that the communities can stay in place, as opposed to once again, the profits leaving to absentee investors. And so there is a lot of opportunity here. We'll talk a little bit more about the why Colorado, why Denver. But at this point, I will hand it over back to Paul to talk a little bit about the report highlights.
Thank you. So here's just a big overview of the research that we did. We conducted interviews in these different cities with a different representative from each of these 7 cities. And we were trying to understand, what have other cities done on a municipal level and what policies
It must be just when Paul speaks. So while he comes back, we took an approach of looking at, we wanted to be able to do this, just didn't have the capacity. And so with the first contract with the city of Denver, we were able to reach out to municipalities and just learn a little bit more about what has worked, what hasn't worked, what level of investment was needed to make sure that they were building a strong ecosystem. In some ways, you know, as we started this, it felt like we were starting from behind. Some of the places like New York had done so much work for the last 5 years, 7 years, actually closer to 15 years of building that ecosystem. And so, but in some ways, their learned experiences have really helped us ensure that we can learn from everything that they've done and then continue to grow that here so that we don't have to make the same mistakes that they've done. So, and I see that Paul is back, so I will hand it back to you.
Thank you. Yeah, I jumped onto my phone's hotspot, so that should be a little more secure. So sorry about that. So some of the big policies that we saw that were really important, just kind of going through this on the list, is, you know, potential city council resolutions for policies in support of allocating funds in the budget, offering startup and conversion support from the city's business assistance programs, offering in-house co-op development or conversion expertise from city employees themselves. Yeah, I can handle this part. And then in-house co-op development, or sorry, procurement bid discounts. That was only done by one place called Berkeley, or Berkeley was the one who did that. Access to the city's existing capital resources, so small business loans and technical assistance. Special treatment regarding licenses, fees, and taxes. You can see that Berkeley was also the only one that implemented that. Support from the city outreach, education, and support for conversions. Grants or contracts to nonprofits who provide cooperative development technical assistance. Almost every city implemented that. Grants to co-ops and nonprofits for co-op development training and co-op boot camp, as well as local trade federations or worker co-ops, so sort of the network effect. Yeah, so you can see kind of just on a broad level that Berkeley had the most check marks here, but New York City also had a lot of check marks. Madison has a long history of co-ops, so each of those 3 cities, the Bay Area, New York City, and Madison, are hubs for worker co-op development, and the municipal investment has accelerated that. So now we want to go a little bit deeper into a few of the examples, just to give some concrete policy examples. Could you go to the next slide, Michelle? So starting with New York City, New York City has done this for 5 years now, but they, as of 2020, they gave $3.6 million, allocated a portion of their budget to 13 different organizations that support cooperatives. That could be cooperative conversions, cooperative startups, and it could even be groups like NICNOC, the New York City Network of Worker Cooperatives, that provides more of a networking hub for cooperatives to connect as peer networks. What they learned is that their initial funding that they allocated to cooperative development organizations created a gap, and they learned that they actually needed to provide direct funding and make sure that there was allocation within the budget and the plan that co-ops could receive funds directly. And so they've implemented a lot of technical assistance that is just direct funding to co-ops so they can acquire technical assistance for accounting, business development, those kinds of things that they have need of. Could we go to the next slide? So Madison, Wisconsin is also, they've had city funding for about 5 years. I actually was co-presenting on cooperatives with someone from Madison a few weeks ago in Philadelphia at the US Federation of Worker Co-op Conference. And we learned about one day before the conference that Madison did not renew their funding. And so the new mayor didn't have co-ops in their budget. So it was a big change for them. And their policy was all implemented through the mayor himself and through like the mayor's budget. And so it was a little bit different than some of the other cities. But because of that, it's kind of put some of their funding in jeopardy in the next 2 or 3 years. They were able to use their funds to create a co-op development coalition that includes lots of community groups. And one of their takeaways they wanted people to understand in our interview with them was that alignment of values between coalition organizations is very crucial and needs to happen early. So what happened here was the city was announced that they were going to fund cooperative development, and a lot of small business organizations that were not familiar with co-ops said, oh, we want some money, we'll take it. And they weren't able to actually provide support to co-ops because they still had a big learning curve of what cooperatives were and how they functioned. So Madison really recommended just making sure that everyone who is receiving municipal funds knows what role they're playing in the co-op development process. Can we go to the next slide? So Berkeley, they really developed most of their support and their the momentum for their initiative through the Office of Economic Development, and that was sort of the lead driver. Then they brought it to City Council in order to develop the sort of how it would best align with the city's policies and the city's priorities. And so this is a picture of 30 worker cooperative members and advocates that attended the City Council meeting to demonstrate their support whenever the City Council did pass an ordinance. And what was really cool about Berkeley is they took the time to develop some definitions of cooperatives in this ordinance and some definitions of democratic management practices. The city of Berkeley, as I mentioned before, created a procurement and bid preference for businesses that have democratic management practices. And so you don't necessarily have to be a worker cooperative, but you do have to have worker control in your business and really prioritize your workers' voices in order to take advantage of this bid preference. Could we go to the fourth example? This last example I wanted to highlight, which is more of a rural community, but I just love the story. This is from the Industrial Commons, and it's a co-op development organization that's based in rural North Carolina that employs about 900 people in 5 different cooperatives. And so they've partnered very closely with the Economic Development Office in the county, the Burke Development Inc., in order to ensure that they are creating local jobs, they are retaining talent. They've also received federal dollars to improve and renovate their workspace. And their big takeaway has been, we need to build on community assets and history first and foremost. So they're from rural North Carolina, which is traditionally textile, and they focused all of their businesses around the textile industry and on making sure that their manufacturing region stays strong and robust, that they're innovative about how they reimagine manufacturing for the 21st century. So I believe those are 4 examples, and I think we're going to go from here back to the city of Denver.
Yeah, so thanks, Paul. Specific to Denver's contract with CCWB, frankly, there's been a tremendous amount of support from the administration and city council and the community at large. I believe the past 2 years, city council has listed co-op development and investment as one of their priorities. And this is a priority as the whole body of city council. So it's been very attractive to those that are familiar with the model. And we as an agency have been encouraged to be as supportive as possible to create a conducive co-op environment or ecosystem. We've had a couple contracts with CCWB. and anticipate that we will enter into another contract with them for 2023. For those of you that are looking, to specifics, we funded those contracts with a combination of general funds and EcoDevo community development block grant funds. The last contract was for CCWB to provide us a comprehensive roadmap, and as you illustrated there, I think some of the things that came out of that were some research on best practices, but really the roadmap was to instruct us as a city is how we could create as supportive environment as possible for the creation of Denver co-ops. And I'll go into that in our next slide. In terms of challenges and barriers, there are just not a ton of people, at least locally, who are familiar with the co-op model and its value, I think, overall in terms of as an economic development tool. And that's internal to the city. So we have some work to do in terms of educating our colleagues, but also externally as well. People, in some instances don't know what to make of it. So the challenge really is education. And we are working with CCWB to address that. I would say that once people become aware, they are generally supportive. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we commissioned the creation of a co-op ecosystem roadmap, and that included specific recommendations for active community outreach. This is really to increase awareness of cooperatives as a business model. Also included recommendations for training and development of community members to support the creation of cooperative. So a train the trainer model. Supporting and guiding groups who are interested in forming cooperatives, making them know that this is an alternative or option for them. Outreach and education to current business owners who are ready to retire to ensure that the business can stay within the community through employee ownership and a conversion strategy. And then also technical assistance and support of cooperatives that are already in operation. We're also looking to see how we as a city, as an anchor institution, can help support the creation and advancement of cooperatives here locally. And then I would say in addition to that, we are always identifying access to capital for small business enterprises. And certainly we're doing the same for cooperatives. And I would say, we are not the only ones locally or working within Denver who are doing this. There are other partners that CCWB is working with, and I'll hand it off to Jessica to talk about some of the other institutional anchors who are working in this space.
Thank you, Seneca, and thank you for the overview. And one of the things that is most exciting about the approach that the city of Denver is recognizing that it takes an ecosystem approach, and so it is maximizing our connection to markets and making sure that cooperatives have that. It's not just about forming, but also ensuring that they can be successful. And one of the most important things that we've seen catalysts after the work that the city of Denver invested on is that others, in essence, the city of Denver has validated the model and has validated the work. And so since our first contract with the city of Denver, we've been able to see some significant investments in the ecosystem, not necessarily for community wealth building per se, but more for the ecosystem, which is what we care about. And so one of those, we've seen support increase from Kaiser Permanente specifically for worker cooperatives. They recently made a multi-year commitment to Center for Community Wealth Building to develop cooperatives in Metro Denver. The state of Colorado has an employee ownership office. And so in full disclosure, I am a commissioner, employee ownership commissioner. And so we care about ensuring that everyone has access and opportunity if they choose the employee ownership path. And so the Office of Economic Development and International Trade is incentivizing employee ownership through statewide grants, through tax credits, and through peer networks of making sure that they're connected to each other. And we've also seen a recent investment from Community First Foundation of a multi-year commitment to the Edgewater Collective to incubate Spanish-speaking cooperatives, specifically in Jefferson County. And so more and more, we're starting to see a lot of energy, and that's the beauty of it. As Seneca talked about, one of the biggest barriers is the lack of knowledge of the model. And so as we continue to work with SBDCs, as we continue to work with community groups, we want to make sure that when we're raising enough awareness about the cooperatives, that we also have the individuals who are ready to support those cooperatives along the formation, along the way, to make sure that they can incorporate in a successful way. And so there's been a lot of effort, and it is very much like the effect. Once one person finds out about it, then more people are excited. And this is really important because as we think about our communities, there's significant change that will happen in the next 10 years. The state of Colorado, OEDIT, recently conducted a study, or commissioned a study that was conducted, where they found that of the almost 650,000 small businesses, Colorado has a significant number of small businesses, 6,653, and 99% of them are small businesses. And yet, of those small businesses, it appears that about 70% will be ready to retire. The owners are ready to retire in the next 10 years. That is a significant opportunity. Out of 653,000 business, 70% of them, the thought of potentially losing either to outside investors or completely closing is overwhelming. If you think about the impact that that'll have on our unique neighborhoods and our communities, this can have a significant ripple effect. And so to do that, we're looking at how do we ensure that these business owners have the opportunity to know that selling to their employees is an option. And so I'm inviting you all to think about ways that you can share the information with business owners, with your communities, because people are ready to retire. And so are we getting the next generation of individuals ready to take on the business? There's a lot of systems in place now that can actually make that happen. It's more about the business owners getting the information needed to continue economic stability and preserve community wealth for the next generation. And so that's been a little bit of an overview. We have a whole list of recommendations that we have proposed to the city of Denver. We'll have a link to the report at the end of it. But we wanted to hear from you all. So if you can go to the next slide, please. So I wanted to have a little bit of a discussion of what type of economic collaboration is possible across the metro area. We know that a lot of the systems that can be the strongest when there is more collaboration. And also because we know that community members, residents are not necessarily thinking about jurisdictions or areas. At the end of the day, businesses in East Colfax, for example, even though they're on the Denver side, interact with a lot of the Aurora neighbors. And so as we're thinking about economic collaboration, what are some of the things that come up? Either policies, leverage that your jurisdiction, your anchor institution can have to support the cooperative economy. So I will now see. Perhaps we can stop share for a little bit. All right, and yeah, maybe having a conversation about what are you all seeing, what leverage or what policies do you have to think about how we support the cooperative economy? And that can be from the anchor perspective, or perhaps looking at contracts to municipalities and looking at the policies, that internal policies that can help spur our economy.
I'll jump in. So At the National Western Center, we have been looking at a number of procurements, campus-wide services procurements. And we are getting okay results in terms of small businesses, local small businesses responding to those procurements. But we're not getting great results in terms of their capacity to compete at the level that they need to compete at in order to be successful. We've had a number of conversations with Iska and Michelle about this, and the concept of looking at some of the future procurements from a cooperative standpoint to try to aggregate those expertises, create more capacity, create more there in order to, you know, get the sort of support, expertise, and, you know, credibility, if you will, around financially and all the other things that we need in order to make responsible decisions for the campus, right? I mean, we can't, as I've worked through this, it's clear that, you know, we're not doing a small business a favor if we throw them into water that's too deep or too much white water that they end up failing. And then we've not done any service to anyone. So we've been looking at the different kind of service groups that might lend themselves to cooperatives. So that's something that I'm interested in learning about as we move forward. Are there different kind of job, you know, sectors, industry sectors that are a better match? And it might be that really is about kind of finding the best practices regionally that we can, you know, benefit from their experience and their successes or their challenges, so that we can, you know, constantly improve for the whole region. So I don't have any of the answers right now. I have more questions than answers, but we're very interested in pursuing that and seeing what we can put together and that can truly work and be successful.
Thank you, Brad. And thank you for highlighting the importance of anchor institutions of looking at where can we shift some of our spending. And perhaps it may not be overnight. It won't be overnight. But as we're thinking about, you know, the next year, the next 3 years, is there an opportunity for any of these contracts to be done, to be performed by a worker-owned cooperative? And that's where we're going to see the most powerful collaboration, because we know that a ownership switch doesn't flip overnight, and so it will take time. And so the more leeway that we get in getting information, then we can connect with communities to make sure that they have that capacity and that they have the support needed for them to thrive. We want to make sure that these cooperatives are successful and that the small businesses are successful. And so the more that we can align our communication, our efforts to make sure that they can provide, because ultimately one of the most important things is that this is not about charity, and this is not about you know, feeling good. This is ultimately about our economic systems creating good paying jobs and ensuring that this wealth stays in our community. Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, I also just wanted to respond briefly to Brad's comment about, you know, the industry and the target industries where this has really been successful. And from my observation, there is a lot of success in service sectors as well as manufacturing that have a high degree of human input. So like the textile plant that I showed, you know, 900 people. In New York, the largest worker co-op has nearly 2,000 members, and they all do home care. And so in industries that have, you know, traditionally low-wage workers, when the workers themselves are able to own that and remove sort of some of the middle management and the profits that might be taken by someone who owns the company outside of them, they are able to earn more wages. That same organization, there's an organization in New York, in Brooklyn, that develops cleaning cooperatives. And they've been able, in most cases, for their workers to own $4 more per hour, just cleaning. And so that's a big boost to their overall annual earnings. And they're also able to earn, you know, profit share on top of that. So
Yeah, I think the National Western Center is in an interesting position right now because we're still very much, a startup. And so starting from the beginning, I think is easier probably, at least from what I've read and heard in other presentations around from anchor institutions. Starting from the beginning versus trying to change something can have its challenges, it could also have its opportunities. But we are sort of at a level right now, and we'll kind of each phase will level up. So I think that's another advantage at the National Western Center. We can start with kind of smaller models and then expand, have time to sort of figure out the systems, figure out what the challenges are, correct, repair, improve, so that we'll, it's a good sort of stepping stone scenario that we have probably over the next 10 years on our campus.
Thank you.
Yeah, just to add to that. So I was, I think, first made aware of sort of the cooperative model when I went on a trip, and I think Patrick is on here, Patrick Horvath, with the Denver Foundation to University Circle. And one of the things I think that that really resonated with me is that it wasn't one particular anchor institution, but it was multiple anchor institutions sort of working together to promote the co-op model. So in that example, right, you had Cleveland Clinic, you had University Hospital, you had Case Western, you had a number of folks that were engaging cooperatives for different services that were needed by all of those institutions. So whether it was janitorial or food production. And so I hope at some point in time, the metro area can mature enough so that we have anchor institutions working together to really promote the co-op model. So it's not a one-off with one particular entity. It really is creating an ecosystem for this model to thrive.
Thank you. And that is the power of this group, right? That it's going to take more than one organization, more than one municipality, more than one anchor institution for this to thrive. Michelle?
Yeah, I wanted to say, Sarah, thanks for chiming in. So Sarah from Colorado State University, and what's interesting is their location at the National Western Center allows them to support what the National Western Center is able to spearhead around cooperative, favoring a cooperative enterprise. And that CSU is tied to state procurement rules, which don't allow sort of that kind of preference at this point. And so it's really cool to see, like, some of you on the call are also tied to that, but we can build off of others that have more flexibility that can help launch these co-ops and help be a key market for these co-ops. And then they can become much more competitive and then can fit the state's, can fit in with the state's procurement rules. That makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other thoughts?
I'm also just curious for the group, like what stood out to you in our presentation, or what sparked your imagination in some way?
I'll speak up. I would just say, unfortunately, we don't have a lot of municipalities on here today, but when Seneca said, this was a relatively new concept and a learning curve for the city of Denver, which is one of our largest and most sophisticated and well-staffed municipalities in the region, that really tells me that we have quite a bit of work to do, but I think that this is a great start, and I like that Denver is taking leadership on this issue, and I think we can learn from that. And I think, really underscoring not only the community wealth building element, which is incredibly important, but the other side of that, that we have these businesses that we could lose. And with this boomer retirement and people leaving and all of the, community assets that are associated with that. So I'm excited about sharing the report and the roadmap with the mayors, and I'm glad that we recorded this and we can share with them. And then I'm hoping that we can make some more connections between the cities and DEDO to further explore this.
Thank you, Catherine. Yes, we
And
consider.
just to piggyback, oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
This is Maisha Fields. Just to piggyback on what Catherine was sharing, deeply respect the work of the Center for Community Wealth Building and bringing this to our forefront. I think what's interesting is that there's already a model in place for corporate wealth building. And our anchor institutions have been active in doing that work as institutions. And they've also been active in doing that work to protect their own power and control, but also their ability to build wealth for their institutions. And we have not seen shared power or shared wealth strategies that really have an impact on community. So I'm excited about the work that you are doing. I'm excited that this could be transferable across the great state of Colorado, but specifically within the Denver metro area, because we absolutely need you. We know that all the things that you guys are working on are a part of the intersectionality of not just wealth, but the things that create wealth: education, housing, healthcare. And so I do think it is going to require greater hand-holding in helping institutions that are primarily white-led by white men, and in some cases other individuals who may have more bias and not understand what it means to be inclusive, and how to do that. And so I appreciate you all putting some of these things together, but I do believe and know it is going to require someone very similar to the community health model, where you have a community navigator who's helping people on the ground get connected to community resources, get connected to how to build wealth. Our anchor institutions need someone to hold their hands and train them step by step on how to do this work as well. So I believe this is a start, but there's so much more work for us to do.
Yeah, thank you, Maisha. Patrick?
Yeah, thanks, and good to see all of you. I've known many of you in this space in a different role when I was at the Denver Foundation, but I'm now really proud and happy to be part of the Center for Community Wealth Building staff. I wanted to point out something that I just came across recently, and your comment, Catherine, about some of the other maybe less well-staffed or smaller municipalities in the Metro Mayor's Caucus that spoke to that really powerfully recently. The Democracy Collaborative, which has debuted and kind of pioneered and championed and researched a lot of the work around worker ownership, and especially as worker ownership connects with anchor work, has begun to look very hard at how municipalities can serve as anchors. And they had a really interesting session. I'm just looking at my notes here on late July this year. It included, and I offer this just so you can follow up with her, because I'm sure she'd be glad to speak with you, the mayor of Meadville, Pennsylvania, a young Black woman named Jamie Kinder, who was elected in a pretty rural, pretty Rust Belty, difficult area of Pennsylvania. She was kind of surprised she got elected, and so when she got into office, she was like, I'm looking at all kinds of opposition here on everything I want to do, but our city is failing. We don't have jobs. We don't have the kind of industrial infrastructure we once had, and we need to really do something. And she has begun working with the Democracy Collaborative and created a whole community wealth building strategy, focusing on how the city can use its resources to build cooperative businesses and to use its procurement power in ways that generate jobs and that kind of thing. So I'd be happy to share the materials from that webinar, but she is someone who I think for a lot of the mayors and their staffs in the smaller cities around the metro area could offer a really, really useful guide into how a municipality can embrace an anchor mission and look at worker ownership as a strategy.
Thank
That's
you, Patrick.
fantastic.
Thank you, Patrick. So I know that we're coming close to the end of our time, but I want you to take a moment for a second and imagine our region as the national leader in cooperative development, supporting stable and meaningful jobs in order to foster a resilient, inclusive, and robust economy that stabilizes gentrifying neighborhoods through economic empowerment of legacy residents and businesses, which fortifies and will fortify all of our areas to withstand any future challenges, any future pandemics, or any future obstacles that we may face. Every single one of us can play a role in this, and it's going to take every single one of us to get our friends, our anchor friends, our municipalities to do it, because at the end of the day, this is what's going to help our communities thrive. So thank you all so much. If you share the slide to go to the next, the final slide. I want to share our contact information. Also want to share the slide, the report. And so if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. Very grateful for the city of Denver for the investment that they've made and really paving the way and leading the way, because in some ways, you know, if we can, again, minimize the mistakes that each one of us makes by collaborating, by using the collective knowledge, we're going to be able to get much further. So we also have the link to the report for those of you who may not be able to access the QR. Oh, thank you, Paul. QR code. But truly appreciate you all being here. If we can be of assistance, let us know. Or if there are any questions, we're happy to answer those.
Thank you, Jessica and Seneca and Paul.
Truly appreciate you all. Have a great day.
You too.
Thank you, everyone.
Pleasure. Thank you.